and welcome to Dose of Wonder. I'm Caitlin, your guide on this journey through mindfulness, mental health, grief, and personal growth. Each episode will dive into honest explorations and gentle reflections to help you find moments of calm, clarity, and a little bit of wonder too. So grab your favorite cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're diving into a topic that touches all of us at some point, and yet it can feel incredibly isolating. Grief. Have you ever found yourself in a quiet moment, maybe brushing your teeth or washing the dishes, thinking, am I doing this wrong? Is there a right way to grieve? I can't tell you how often people feel this way. That question, am I normal, comes up more than you might expect. And the short answer from both research and lived experience is yes, what you're feeling is normal. Grief isn't one size fits all. There isn't a universal script. Grief is that tangled mix of emotions, physical sensations, and mental heaviness we experience after a loss. And while we often immediately think about death, it's broader than that. You can grieve a job you loved, a long-term friendship that ends, a relationship that collapses, or even a pet you adored. Grief is part of the human experience, and the ways it shows up are as varied as the people feeling it. Before we dig in, a quick note. This episode is educational and reflective. It's not intended to diagnose or treat anyone, and it doesn't replace professional support. If you are struggling, please reach out to a qualified healthcare provider or therapist. With that important context out of the way, let's explore 6 different ways grief can manifest, and maybe help you better understand what you're experiencing, or how to support someone you care about. Number 1, normal grief. We'll start with what most people think of first, normal grief. Normal grief is when you can keep up with everyday life, work, family, errands, even while feeling the weight of loss. That doesn't mean the grief is light. Inside, it can hit you like a sudden storm. A song on the radio, a smell, a fleeting memory, and suddenly you're flooded with sadness, longing, or even anger. Physically, grief can show up in unexpected ways. Sleep disturbances, fatigue that sleep can't fix, aches and pains, changes in appetite, sometimes the loss of it, sometimes comfort eating. All of these are part of the process. What makes grief normal is that over time, those intense moments tend to lessen. You don't stop feeling the loss, you adapt. You learn to carry it alongside life's daily responsibilities. That adaptation is what researchers call establishing a new normal. It's not easy and it doesn't happen overnight, but it's the slow weaving of loss into your life. Number 2 is anticipatory grief. This is a type of grief that can feel confusing. This happens before a loss occurs. Think about watching a loved one live with a terminal illness, or making the difficult decision to euthanize a pet you love deeply. Grief starts early. You're mourning what you know is inevitable, before it even happens. Emotionally, anticipatory grief can feel different from grief after a death. There's sadness, yes, but often also anger and anxiety. You might feel like you're losing control, frustrated at the unfairness of the situation. That anger isn't directed at the person who is ill, it's at the circumstance, at fate, at illness, at helplessness. For caregivers, this type of grief can be particularly intense. It's a prolonged, complicated emotional journey, often combined with guilt if you feel your reactions are inappropriate. Recognizing it as grief, valid and real, can help you navigate it with more compassion for yourself. Next up is complicated grief, also known as persistent complex bereavement disorder. Sometimes grief gets stuck. It doesn't gradually ease. Strong emotions persist, interfering with daily life. This is called complicated grief, or persistent complex bereavement disorder. The difference between intense normal grief and complicated grief isn't intensity, it's functional impact. If grief keeps you from working, maintaining relationships, or enjoying hobbies months or even a year after the loss, this may be complicated grief. Mayo Clinic research emphasizes that this is a serious condition. It's not about weakness or not about trying hard enough. It's a recognized clinical issue, and professional help is often necessary. Seeking support doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human and deserve guidance through a difficult process. The next type of grief is delayed grief, which is grief that shows up late. Sometimes the mind puts grief on pause, maybe because the initial loss felt too overwhelming to process alongside life's demands. The feelings are still there, like water behind a dam. Then, years later, a small, seemingly insignificant or unrelated event, a breakup, the death of a pet, even a memory, can release all that pent-up emotion. Suddenly, you're flooded with grief that feels out of proportion to the trigger. It can be disorienting, even shame-inducing, until you understand what's happening. Delayed grief reminds us that the mind has its own timing, often protective, sometimes adaptive, and always real. It's not too late to grieve, the grief that has been waiting for the right moment to be expressed. Next is disenfranchised grief, or hidden grief. Grief isn't always socially recognized. Disenfranchised grief happens when society, friends, or family don't validate your loss. Examples include the death of a pet, an ex-partner, an online friend, or someone you barely knew. The feelings are real and valid, but others may minimize or dismiss them. The lack of recognition can make grief feel isolating. Understanding disenfranchised grief can help you hold space for yourself and others. Just acknowledging someone's loss, even if it doesn't fit your idea of a major loss, is one of the most powerful forms of support. And the last form of grief is absent grief. This is when grief doesn't show up outwardly. You might wonder, why don't I feel devastated? What's wrong with me? The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines absent grief as showing few or no signs of distress after a loss. There may be many reasons why this happens. Unrealistic cultural or family expectations about how grief should look. Prior anticipatory grief that did some emotional work ahead of time. Shock or the mind needing time to process the reality. Overload from practical responsibilities like funeral arrangements, or a distant or complex relationship with the deceased. Absent grief is not a lack of feeling. It's an adaptive or protective response, a way the mind copes with intense loss. Recognizing this can relieve guilt and self-doubt. So here's some reflections and takeaways. We've covered the 6 ways that grief can manifest. Normal grief, which is the everyday waves of sadness that eventually adapt into a new normal. Anticipatory grief, mourning before the loss. Complicated grief, when grief stalls and professional support may be needed. Delayed grief, grief that arrives later, often triggered by another event. Disenfranchised grief, grief that society doesn't always recognize. And absent grief, grief that is internalized or delayed by shock or practical demands. The biggest takeaway is there is no single right way to grieve. Your experience is valid, whatever it looks like. And understanding the variety of grief types can help you be more compassionate towards yourself and others. If you're listening and feeling overwhelmed, please reach out for help. A therapist, counselor, or grief support group can make a huge difference. Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And maybe one last thought. Recognizing these different types of grief isn't just about validating your own experience. It's also about building empathy for others. That friend grieving a lost pet, a job, or a long-distance friend, even if it doesn't seem major to you, their grief is real. Listening, acknowledging, and holding space for that loss can make a profound difference. So thank you for joining me today as we explored the 6 phases of grief. I hope this conversation brings clarity, comfort, and permission to experience grief in your own way. Next week, we'll be returning to Life Musings with an article I wrote titled, "Stop the World, I Want to Get Off." Until then, thanks for listening, and don't forget to live with a dose of wonder.
In the stillness we begin, with stories stitched in softer skin. A spark, a sigh, a breath of